It is Wednesday, March 30th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schaff, and back with me for the first time in a while is a familiar face. It's rankings ace Jared Smola. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Yeah, you've had some awesome guests on in the past month or so. I feel a little bit like I've been getting cheated on, but glad to be back on here with you.
Don't worry, I'd still smack any presenter that was saying anything about your hair. So no loss of feelings here. Of course, tomorrow is the deadline for roster cutdowns in FFPC Dynasty leagues. And obviously, we're in the thick of Dynasty season anyway, with rookie drafts coming, the NFL draft coming, people trying to get their trades in now before everything changes in April. So, Jared, it's the perfect time for us to roll out some advancements in our own Dynasty tools and Dynasty coverage. I think the first thing that people will notice, and if you're on the Draft Sharks email list, you heard about this stuff because we told you about it via email. And if you're not, get on the Draft Sharks email list so you do find out about this stuff and you find out news bites and everything, what the content is that we're rolling out throughout the summer. But I think the first thing that people will notice is a more robust format for our Dynasty rankings. We've worked some automation into the process to make it a little easier to assess what we can actually expect from players year to year. Because, I mean, to this point, Jared, it's like, we know how we feel about the guy in general, but it's just kind of going on that feeling. What do I feel like he's going to do 3 years from now? Now it's a little bit more like, well, here's what our numbers actually indicate we can kind of expect.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we have Dynasty projections now. That's the big change. And I think, we've always, or for as long as I've been with Draft Sharks, been big on, projections fueled rankings. This entire game we play is based on stats and numbers. So that needs to be a big part of your process. It never was for us with Dynasty. It is now. So yeah, we spent a bunch of time this offseason looking at aging curves by position, when guys peak, when guys start to decline, how much they decline and when, then just average career lengths, how long we can expect these guys to be in the league producing for our fantasy team. So we spend a lot of time digging into that. And then we're basically taking our current year projections, which are now up on the site as well for 2022, and applying those aging curves, applying those average career lengths to come up with 3, 5, and 10-year projections. And we take all that data and kind of spit out one Dynasty projection, the DMVP Dynasty value for every single player. And the thing that allows us to do is now use our draft war room for Dynasty. So you can now plug your Dynasty rules into our draft war room, get customized Dynasty rankings for your Dynasty league, and use that war room for your startup drafts or for your rookie drafts coming up, later this summer.
Yeah, and of course, we're not talking about the same aging curve for quarterbacks as we have for running backs, because those two positions don't tend to age in the same way. So those are specified for the position. And yeah, it's just, that and the war room, it's the kind of thing that you always want to do, but I'm like, I don't know how to do it. How are we going to do this? People would ask, why can't we have an MVP board for Dynasty drafts? And I'm like, I just don't know how. Fortunately, we have some smart programmers working with us now that can, take these projections that we do. We're not, passing that off to an outsourced spot, but take that and actually build it into the process that puts some reality into these feelings. I think, one of the nice things about Dynasty versus redraft is that there is still some more feeling to it. It's not totally math, but you gotta inject some reality into your feelings on players if you really want to optimize what you're doing.
Yeah, and not to get too deep into our process, but we do have the ability to kind of massage the aging curve for each player and adjust.
I'm not sure that's the best word choice right now, Jared.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry. And adjust how long we expect that player to be in the league. So it's not just spitting out a number and we're going with that. We do still have the ability to make adjustments as we see fit. But it's been interesting just seeing what results were spit out when we first ran this, taking our 2022 projections, applying those aging curves, based on how many years the player has been in the league, just kind of seeing what it spit out. It made me think more about these players and how we should be valuing them in Dynasty.
Mm-hmm. And don't worry, we are licensed projection therapists, so nobody here that shouldn't be. So without getting further into that process, you can go check it out and see what you want to see and ask us questions that you might have questions about. But we're going to get into talking about some of these players, which is really, I think, what we're all looking for. The whole point of the process is to let us know what players we want to get, what players we want to get rid of, and just how to manage our Dynasty team. So We'll go position by position today. We'll start at quarterback because obviously those guys are most important. Jared, who are some or even just one risers at QB for you in Dynasty? And it doesn't have to be somebody that's specifically rising for you, but somebody that's a riser in general at the position.
I mean, for me, it's Russell Wilson, who I was sort of starting to be out on. But to me, the move to Denver is awesome for his dynasty value. And you can, I think there's an argument to be made whether he has a downgrade in weaponry going from Seattle to Denver. I do think Lockett plus Metcalf is better than Denver's top two wide receivers. But Judy and Sutton isn't bad. Tim Patrick, who I'm going to talk about a bit later as well, he's a really nice number 3. They still have Albert Okwebunam there at tight end, who I think has some upside. You have a young stud back in Javonte Williams. So I think Wilson's weaponry is still just fine. But to me, the big thing, I think we're going to see him probably set a career high in passing attempts this season. I mean, that was always the complaint from Wilson owners in Seattle, just, they didn't throw the ball enough. And, and it's true. Wilson has never ranked higher than 9th in pass attempts per game. And he's only been in the top 15 once in his entire career. He finished 9th that season. I think I think he's going to finish top 10. I think he has a chance to, finish higher than 9th, set a new career high in passing attempts this season. So that's exciting for me. And again, I think, even though he's an older guy, I think it's going to, give him higher end production than he would have had in Seattle for at least the next, handful of seasons.
Yeah, I think he's a less significant mover for me just because I've always been in kind of the believe in Russell Wilson and trust that he's going to outperform what's around him. But it can only be a good thing to get out of what's going on in Seattle right now, because it looks like the guys running that team just have no idea what they're doing at this point, just based on who they're spending money on and what they're trying to build. So I think it's unquestionably a positive move, and we'll see what he can do for the receivers. And we'll talk about the effect on those guys when we get to that position later on. I think a clear riser this offseason is Tua Tagovailoa, and we'll see what he does with it. But if you add Tyreek Hill, I mean, we don't have a whole lot of evidence to go on in terms of measuring the impact, but it seems like a positive. So Tua is going to go into a season where he is, last season was the first one where he was the guy going into the year. Now he gets his second year of that. He adds Tyreek Hill. He gets second year Jalen Waddle. The team retained Mike Gesicki. It even added Chase Edmonds. I mean, when you look at it versus the other moves, it's not all that significant, but it's probably an upgrade over Myles Gaskin as a receiver. And the new coaching staff, Mike McDaniel. Again, we don't know for sure that he's going to be a plus or how much of a plus he's going to be, but I would say based on how intelligent he comes across in his interviews, the history with Kyle Shanahan, I think it makes more sense to bet on him being a positive offensive influence than a negative here. So I think overall, I am much more optimistic for Tua right now than I have been at any other point since he entered the league.
Yeah, me too. And Miami bolstered the offensive line this offseason too, which was key. Tron Armstead, the most notable addition there. So that's good news for Tua. I mean, I think the biggest knock against Tua coming into the league was just maybe that he was more of a product of his weapons at Alabama. Like he has like that quality of weapons now in Miami. So there's really no excuses for Tua at this point. I do think this is kind of like a make or break season for him, but he's definitely someone I'm willing to bet on this year and longer term in Dynasty.
And he's remained a decent value in best ball drafts right now, even outside of Dynasty, despite the Tyreek Hill move. Any other guys in the risers category for you?
No other risers for me. I mean, if we want to stick with Tyreek Hill, I do think Patrick Mahomes is a faller, and he just has to be when you lose a weapon as good as Tyreek Hill, as good of a fit in the offense as Tyreek Hill. I mean, and we'll see what the Chiefs do in the draft, but so far they've just been making these shorter term additions. Juju Smith-Schuster on the 1-year deal. MVS got a 3-year deal, but if you look at it, it's really like a 1-year commitment, and we'll see beyond that. And that now. Maybe it's an opportunity to even go buy Patrick Mahomes if possible, because he is still, potentially the most talented quarterback we've ever seen. And he's still, he still has age on his side. To me, Mahomes went from in that top tier with Josh Allen. To me, now it's Josh Allen kind of alone in the top tier. And then Mahomes is with like the Justin Herberts, the Kyler Murray, the Lamar Jackson second tier. So he's still an awesome dynasty asset, but he has to take a hit losing Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I think we probably had Patrick Mahomes rated a little too highly over the past couple of years after the way he debuted as a starter. It might be a little bit more of a correction at this point, kind of forced upon us by Tyreek Hill. I've actually offered Patrick Mahomes twice to the Justin Herbert owner in our league, not straight up. I've tried to add some other things in just to see kind of what the perception is on Mahomes. So I don't know how successful that pursuit is at this point. And I'm not looking to sell low, but I agree with you that you have to take a ding when Tyreek Hill is gone. Travis Kelce's getting older. We'll talk about him a little bit later. There's a chance that we see a lot less from Patrick Mahomes this season and maybe over the next few than what we've seen so far in his young career. On the faller side as well, I think Aaron Rodgers necessarily has to fall because he loses Davante Adams, and I have no idea yet what he's going to add. It has been nothing to this point. It looks like a nice draft to be looking for wide receivers and to have the first round picks, but you can add 2 day one wideouts and still not get what he had with Davante Adams over the past few years. So especially with a guy like Rodgers, who's so close to the end of his career, and it's a risky asset in Dynasty anyway. I think you take away his top receiver and it's tough for me to like him at all, really.
Yeah, agreed. Now, I don't know what you do with him necessarily because I don't think you're going to get a lot from him in a trade. Like if you're a competing team, I just hang on to him. Hope he can give you, one more top 12 season. I don't think, selling low probably isn't the move unless you're a total rebuild and you're willing to take, I don't know, like a, third round rookie pick for Rodgers. It might make sense in that case.
Yeah. I think the best bet is if you're in super flex and you go to a team that's weak at one quarterback spot, and you probably still have to take a little bit low, but I think he might even be at the point now where selling what seems like a little bit low could work out, as soon as a year from now.
Yeah, that's fair.
Anybody else for the fallers?
No.
So this has been a crazy year for movement at many positions, but, a noisy one at quarterback. So we'll talk about some of the guys that have switched teams and the impact there. And obviously you have to start with Deshaun Watson. So the off-field stuff with him is the question mark that we don't know the answer to yet. And clearly with the deplorable contract structure that he and Cleveland worked out, they don't even know what's going to happen. Roger Goodell says there's no timeline for it because the NFL loves to push these things off until something forces them to actually decide when and whether he's going to be suspended. So we don't know about Watson for this season. Dynasty, I think that matters a whole lot less. And I think it's more about what we should expect longer term. And clearly the guaranteed contract says Cleveland's committing to him. And to me, Jared, I think what you might worry about with Deshaun Watson going to Cleveland is, they've been run heavy. But when they trade for Deshaun Watson, give up as much as they did both in picks and money, trade for Amari Cooper, and sign David Njoku for significant money, that tells me that we should expect this team to throw a pretty good bit more starting in 2022. Now, I don't know if we can expect a shift all the way to like what the 2020 Bills did, but something similar to what the Ravens did last year before Lamar Jackson went down, I think is well within reach.
Yeah, I currently have them projected to be like middle of the pack in pass rate, whereas they were like bottom 5 last season. So it's a significant shift. I'm with you. I don't think they're going to become the Bills or the Bucs and be top 3 in pass rate. So it's not in Stefanski's DNA from what we've seen so far. And they do still have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, who are going to be big pieces of the offense. But the nice thing with Watson is you don't need him to throw it 650 times. One, he has been super efficient as a passer in his career so far. He's actually second all time in adjusted yards per pass attempt, and adjusted yards per pass attempt just takes yards per attempt and then factors in touchdowns and deducts them for interceptions. He is behind only Patrick Mahomes in career adjusted yards per pass attempt, right ahead of Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. So I feel like the fact that we haven't seen Watson in a while now, people have maybe forgotten just how good he is as a passer. And then you throw in the rushing ability, 31 rushing yards per game for his career so far. That's 6th most among active quarterbacks. So super efficient passer is going to give us a lot of fantasy value with his legs, behind a nice offensive line in Cleveland, some weapons now, we'll see. I think they're going to make another addition at wide receiver. We'll see if they, bring Jarvis Landry back or add a rookie, but Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Njoku, there's enough there. Off-field stuff aside, I am very in on Watson in Dynasty, going forward. He turns just 27 in September, so he's still super young.
Yeah, all that stuff could make him even a buy low to some degree because his ceiling is top 3 at the position still. So, morality aside, and if you don't want to be involved with Deshaun Watson, that's totally understandable. But just from a pure fantasy points perspective, I certainly think he still has that ceiling. And, we could look back. I was remembering this morning at how efficient he's been as a passer so far. We can say, yeah, but he spent all that time with DeAndre Hopkins. Amari Cooper's not shabby as your, next number one receiver. And like you said, they're going to still add something, maybe two somethings significant at wideout going forward. So I think that he'll be in good shape overall, fantasy wise, with who he's throwing to. Mitchell Trubisky signed with the Steelers after a fair amount of noise that he was, a hot commodity. I think that the money came out making sense for what he is versus the landscape that he comes out into. But now, Jared, I don't know whether to consider him a sell for Dynasty or a buy. And I think it really could differ depending on what your particular league mates think of him and your situation, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say if there's anyone in your league who is betting on Trubisky making it as a long-term starter in the NFL, I'd sell Trubisky to that owner right now. I mean, even the contract the Steelers gave him, I don't even think it locks him in as their starter this season. I think he probably is. Pittsburgh's probably waiting to see what gets to them in the draft. I think they pick like 20th or something, so they probably don't have a chance at Willis without a move up. We'll see which of the other guys makes it to them. 2 years, $14 million. That puts them outside the top 20 in average annual salary and 2022 salary. And if you look at the contract, they can pretty much get out of it after this season. So it's really just a 1-year deal. So I think Pittsburgh's like, okay, we'll maybe give Trubisky a shot this season. Maybe he surprises us, but more likely than not, our long-term starter is not on the roster at this point.
Yeah, I mean, most likely this is a super flex league decision. It's probably not somebody that's on the move in one quarterback leagues. I agree that if somebody is valuing him, go ahead and sell him. I would also be okay with holding him because when Trubisky is on the field, he's a high upside fantasy quarterback. The upside here is that he can be top 12 caliber as long as he's starting. The downside is I'm with you. I would much rather bet that he's going to stay a long-term bust than that he suddenly blossoms in this new opportunity. And, you can go ahead and miss me with the stories about how he reinvented himself sitting for a year behind Josh Allen in the QB haven that Buffalo is at this point. So Trubisky, not valuable, solid upside for 2022, not a lock for anything at this point. So, read the landscape of your particular league.
I mean, I'd say that the spot to hold Trubisky and maybe even try to buy him for cheaply is in a super flex league if you're competing. I think Trubisky could be a useful quarterback too this season. As you said, he has flashed upside. He can run 21 rushing yards per game for his career so far. And, in Pittsburgh, he'll be working with, I think, pretty easily the best weapons of his career. He did not have a whole lot to work with in Chicago.
Yes, a nice spot for him to land this year. And it's good for him that this QB class doesn't have any guaranteed year one starters. We'll see where these guys end up going. It seems like based on mock drafting, we could either expect the first one to go like 6th or the first one to go like 25th, and nobody knows.
Yeah, definitely an underwhelming quarterback class. So as you said, that helps Trubisky at least for 2022.
It helps Carson Wentz as well, who for the second straight offseason has been traded for fairly significant draft picks. So I think Carson Wentz probably has even less of a selling market than Mitchell Trubisky. I think he's a hold in all formats. And I think he probably is even a little bit better fantasy prospect than Trubisky because based on what Washington gave up, I think there's a better chance that Carson Wentz finishes this season as Washington's starter than Mitchell Trubisky does. And of course, some of that depends on who each team might draft coming up. But Carson Wentz arguably might be in a better spot now than he was last year. He has Terry McLaurin, he has Curtis Samuel, and he's with a team that's probably going to throw the ball more than Indy did last year. The Colts are just fifth, the fifth most run-heavy team in the league. Washington was 2 spots above that with Taylor Heineke as its starter. In the previous 2 years, they were a 60 to 62% passing team.
Yeah, so Wentz is counting a little over 28 million against Washington's cap this season. So that to me pretty much locks him in as at least their week 1 starter. And I think, kind of see where it goes from there. And if they do add a rookie in the first round, but I do think Wentz will be the week 1 starter. He has no dead money in his contract beyond this season. So he could definitely be just a one and done guy in Washington. That's kind of how I would treat him in fantasy. I think he's, kind of there with Trubisky, where if you're competing and need a quarterback too in a super flex league, Wentz can help you this season, but I would not be expecting much from him beyond 2022. I can't believe the stuff coming straight out of the Colts coaches and front office mouth about how much they hate Wentz and just wanted him out of there for kind of whatever they could get.
It's really just Jim Irsay though, isn't it?
I think Reich said some stuff too, hasn't he?
I don't know. I heard him saying that he loved Carson Wentz. I don't tend to read into those comments too much, but I see the headlines from Jim Irsay saying that was a mistake that we clearly needed to get out of.
Right, which is just something you don't hear often, so it's just kind of shocking when you do.
Jim Irsay though is somebody who tends to say things that we don't often hear.
Sure, that's fair.
That's why I wonder though. Sometimes guys like that, sometimes they're just as crazy as they seem. Other times they're the only one actually saying the truth. So it's interesting either way.
For sure.
Marcus Mariota was another QB carousel guy, signed in Atlanta after they traded away Matt Ryan. And it's easy to see what the upside path could be for Marcus Mariota based on how he can run. We saw a flash of it with the Raiders, but I think it's also important to remember his history. And that is back in Tennessee, 2015, 16, 17, 5 years as a starter there. He finished as QB 22, QB 11, QB 23, QB 36, and QB 33 in fantasy points per game. So the rushing upside is there, but it did not help him pretty much at all with the Titans. So it's not something we should count on delivering real fantasy value this season.
He just ran less in Tennessee than I remember. 22 rushing yards per game in Tennessee, just one more yard per game than Trubisky averaged in Chicago. So I think Mariota, if you just go back to his college career and his measurables, has upside to do more on the ground. We'll see if Atlanta lets him do it. But man, who is he throwing to in Atlanta this season? Kyle Pitts and not much else at this point. They do have the 8th overall pick in the draft. I think, you see a wide receiver mocked there a lot of times, but even then, you add Drake London and then it's just like a subpar pass catching core rather than an awful pass catching core. So that's sort of why Mariota is not super interesting for this season. And then he's another guy where you look at the contract, it's really just a 1-year commitment from Atlanta. I would expect them to, add someone either this year or next year's draft. Mariota is more likely than not just a 1-year starter for Atlanta.
Yeah, he's worth stashing on somebody's bench, but he's not somebody that should move the trade market at all. Baker Mayfield, I'm very curious to see how things wind up with him. And it stinks for him that he's stuck in Cleveland, who has handled this as poorly as you possibly could, the situation. Because Baker Mayfield, I think at this point, we all collectively underrate what he's done as a quarterback. He was terrible last year. He was also playing through a shoulder injury through much of the year. The year before, Mayfield had the 8th best PFF passing grade among starting quarterbacks. 2018, he was 11th as a rookie in that category. In between was a rough year. So far, we have 2 solid to good seasons of Baker Mayfield as an NFL quarterback and 2 bad seasons. So I would say at worst right now, the jury's out and we'll see where he goes. But the way that he's being treated in Cleveland and everything surrounding it, it kind of changes the perception to, well, here's a quarterback bust.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not ready to bury him yet. But man, it seems like the NFL is kind of close to that point. It sounds like teams are just waiting for the Browns to release Mayfield because they can't take on his contract. But even when that happens, I don't know. Like Seattle seems like the only place. I guess Carolina too is another spot where he could win the week 1 starting job. And there's just not a whole lot of spots left for Mayfield to have a job for this coming season.
Carolina, of course, was the spot where it was reported that the 2 sides don't want each other. I forget if it was the Panthers or him, or they just agreed that they didn't want that.
It was like mutual disinterest, I think was the phrase.
I find it hard to believe. Honestly, if he's a free agent, I don't see why Carolina would be like, ew. And I don't see why he would be like, I don't want to live in Charlotte. So that one doesn't make any sense to me if there is truly mutual disinterest.
Yeah, I mean, you could do worse than throwing to DJ Moore and Christian McCaffrey, right? And having to beat out Sam Darnold, which I think Baker Mayfield could do.
If I'm the Bucs, I'm like, all right, guys, let's just wait until they cut Baker Mayfield, and then we will sign him. He can shack up with Tom for a year. They can eat breakfast together, and then next year we've got a new quarterback.
Yeah, it would be a good move for the Bucs. I don't know if Baker is willing to sit for a year, but it'd probably be a good move for his career at this point.
He might have to, and I've been through Tampa a few times. It's not a bad place to spend a year if that's what you're, if that's what you're destined to do.
For sure.
Davis Mills is the last quarterback we'll talk about, and he hasn't moved anywhere, but nobody else has moved in at the position in Houston. And Jared, he seems like, somebody that's easy to forget about. It's, a matter of time before Houston replaces him, but that might not be the case. I think all of this movement, all these other names might have him a little bit underrated at this point.
Well, he had a nice rookie year, especially considering where he did it. Like Houston, this team that we all thought was like a total doormat heading into last season. But so there were 5 rookie quarterbacks that had 300 plus dropbacks last year. Mills was one of them. Then you had Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, and Mac Jones. Mills finished third among those 5 in PFF passing grade, ahead of Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson. He was second in adjusted completion rate, behind only Mac Jones. So there was less fanfare on Mills coming into the league. He was not a first-round pick, but he was the number 1 recruit in the 2017 recruiting class. Like, he was a highly touted recruit coming into the college ranks. Had some injury issues at Stanford, didn't have a great career there. But I think there's some potential there. Houston, so far, is talking as if he's going to get a shot to be the guy again this season. They do have the 3rd overall pick and the 13th overall pick in the draft next month, so that'll kind of tell us exactly how high they are on Mills, whether they choose to spend one of those 2 picks on one of these rookie quarterbacks.
Yeah, and he's another guy who stands to benefit from it being a weak quarterback class. So we'll see what Houston does. But I mean, if he goes from, a surprising rookie season, I think we can all agree, to a solid to good second season, it would be tough to just displace him in year 3. And he was somebody that was talked about as a potential future NFL starter heading into last year's draft, and probably slipped to some degree because he only had 11 starts in college. So I think that it's easy to overlook him, and I think that you probably can overlook him and not wind up regretting it. But Davis Mills is stashable right now, and he's somebody who could stick as a starter and be like a Derek Carr type going forward.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. There's not a huge fantasy ceiling because he offers nothing as a runner. And, Houston still has a long way to go to, be an offense that's really going to, support a quarterback one that doesn't run the ball. So the fantasy upside isn't huge. But again, super flex, you're looking for just starters. And Mills has a chance to be, a longer term starter in the NFL.
Yep, and Superflex is gaining every season, so it's more and more significant. So keep Davis Mills in mind if you're looking for a lower roster quarterback who might surprise you going forward. Now, though, let's move on to running backs. And for risers, Jared, I got to start with Elijah Mitchell because he came from nowhere last year to somewhere this year, and now it's a question of where he belongs. So among 61 running backs with 70-plus carries last year, we all know the raw numbers, but here are some more advanced numbers. 21st among that 61-player group in elusive rating, 23rd in PFF rushing grade, 19th among 50 qualifiers in Football Outsiders rushing DVOA, 16th in PPR points per game, 25th in total PPR points, missed 6 games, 13th among running backs and carries, tied for 64th in targets, 9 fewer targets than JaMychal Hasty. And that's the area that has me wary of getting too excited about Elijah Mitchell going forward. What about you?
No, I have him here as a riser as well, and it's really just because he made it through free agency. Well, I guess not completely yet. There's still some running backs out there, and Melvin Gordon in particular, but I haven't heard him linked to San Francisco at all. But so far Mitchell's made it through free agency without the Niners making any significant additions, and they did not bring Raheem Mostert back. And everything we saw last season, every time Mitchell was healthy, he was the clear workhorse, and he was getting 20 plus carries in a lot of those games. So he still has to dodge the draft here. Trey Sermon is still in San Francisco. We'll see if he can turn things around this coming season, but it's looking more and more like Mitchell will again be, the workhorse ball carrier in San Francisco this season, even if he's not going to do a whole lot in the passing game.
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly he is a factor. I expect him to stay a factor in their running game. I also think that we should expect them to add something and to give somebody else carries this coming year, because that's the way that Kyle Shanahan's been operating in San Francisco. So, I'm not selling Elijah Mitchell for whatever I can get, but I'm also not trusting that he is really an RB1 or even a high to mid RB2 going forward, because I think there's room for that to just be a flash and him to go away. Really. I mean, I think, even though I say I'm not expecting him to crash, I do think there's a chance that we just saw his best season and that nothing else, matches that. He is a guy who shared work with Trey Ragas at Louisiana. He is a guy who couldn't do better than Louisiana and was a 6th-round pick to the same team that took Trey Sermon in round 3. So I'm not saying Trey Sermon's going to outperform him this year. I'm saying Trey Sermon probably gets a little bit more work this year. I think they probably add something else, whether it's a later free agent or something else in the draft. So I guess overall, I'm guessing that there's probably going to be somebody more excited about Elijah Mitchell's outlook than I am in my league in most cases.
Yeah, I mean, that's always tough to know. But I mean, I was actually just going to say that I think all those concerns you mentioned, most people have those. And I don't think you're going to get, a top 15 return, top 15 running back type of return for Mitchell. Just looking at the startup ADP on Dynasty League football, he's RB22 in startup ADP, which I think is fair. I'm not going out and buying him at that price, but I'm not going to sell him for an RB22 return right now in most cases. So I just think he's a hold.
So where's Damian Harris on that same list?
Damian Harris. Let me do the old Control F. He is RB31.
So that's kind of what's got me thinking that somebody else is valuing Elijah Mitchell more, because I think that that's really the realistic outlook, is that he's similar to Damian Harris. Damian Harris is going that much later. And I mean, if I can sell Elijah Mitchell for Miles Sanders plus something, or CEH plus something, then I'm willing to do that, even if I end up being wrong ultimately.
Yeah, totally fair there.
Who do you have besides Mitchell on the risers?
I have James Conner, who I think was like almost written off at this time last year by Dynasty owners. He's younger than you think. He's I think 27 now. So you're not like where you have age on his side necessarily, but I'm also not worried about a decline at this point in his career. And it sure looks like he's gonna be the feature back in Arizona for the next handful of seasons here. We saw him in that role for 6 games last year without Chase Edmonds, and James Conner was a stud in fantasy, 16.7 carries and 5.3 targets in the 6 games that Chase Edmonds missed. He got a 3-year, $21 million deal, which is pretty nice money for a running back in this day and age. He's actually 10th among running backs in average annual salary this season. And it's just a good spot for running backs. We saw Kenny and Drake. You remember when he came over to Arizona in 2019 in that trade in the middle of the season, he was a top 10 running back the rest of the way. Drake was RB 16 in points per game in 2020. Then again, we saw James Conner when he was kind of the clear lead back, put up big fantasy numbers last season. So I just, again, he's not someone you're going to build around, who you're going to get, 5-6 seasons out of, but I think Conner can give you, 2 to 3 more high quality fantasy seasons right now.
It's nice to see that a running back in his mid to later 20s can get paid for producing. At the same time, you kind of have to wonder about a team deciding to do that just a year after proving that they can find a guy who can do that for less than $2 million on the open market. It's like the NFL teams refuse to learn their own lesson sometimes. Again, I'm happy that he and Leonard Fournette can get that money, but it goes against what the teams just showed in the previous free agent cycle is possible. So I agree. James Conner, you have to like how this offseason has gone for him, when last year he got a tiny 1-year deal and now he gets 3 years and 21. Same type of deal for Leonard Fournette with Tampa Bay, where last year all he got was a 1-year, $3 million deal, and now he gets paid. I wish that I had bet on those guys in early best ball drafting before free agency opened. I was thinking, though, these guys just signed small 1-year deals. It's tough to bet on them now getting big money and keeping those workloads at a time when the league knows that aging running backs are not assets worth betting on. Then they go and do that. So I think, it's certainly interesting for those two. I think it's also worth keeping in mind as we determine how to value some other running backs that are moving toward that area. The guy who might be 25 and seeming like he's struggling a little bit. It's maybe a reminder that there's potential for him to rebound and get the opportunity. So we might talk about a couple of guys like that going forward. But, I agree for now, James Conner, Leonard Fournette look like more valuable fantasy assets in Dynasty than they were seeming like they were headed for a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, I would not have given James Conner a 3-year, $21 million deal if I was the Cardinals GM. But I mean, for fantasy purposes, to me, it just says that they really value him, think he's a good fit in the offense. And it really, we'll see. Teams do surprising things, but it'd be surprising to me if they spent big draft capital on a running back. I do think Arizona's probably going to add a running back because right now it's Benjamin and I think Jonathan Ward behind James Conner. So maybe a day 3 back. But again, if that's all they add, I think Conner is pretty safe as the clear feature guy in that backfield this season.
I wouldn't be shocked if it's a day 2 guy. I think the Cardinals have made some questionable offensive decisions at some point. I think the jury's still out on Cliff Kingsbury as a coach. But yeah, it's a good opportunity for James Conner, and we'll see exactly what they add. My other riser is Antonio Gibson, and it's not because I'm in love with Antonio Gibson going forward, but because he has climbed, I think, perception-wise versus last year. He did get more work in his second season, up from 12.1 carries per game to 16.1. His yards per carry were down, though. His elusive rating was down. His rushing DVOA was down, 38th among 50 qualifiers in that category. His receptions per game were exactly the same. And then Washington paid up in free agency to keep J.D. McKissic from leaving town. So it seems like they want to keep throwing those passes to McKissic and not, bump up Gibson's work. So I like Antonio Gibson at cost for this coming season because drafters have knocked him down a little bit after he didn't quite deliver what they were hoping for on upside last year. But I think he's probably a little bit overrated longer term. I think if draft capital works out for the top rookies this year, I'd probably rather have Breece Hall than Antonio Gibson straight up. Maybe Kenneth Walker. We'll see exactly where he lands and how early he's picked. And then, I've got some other veterans that I'll compare Gibson to in a few minutes, but that's kind of where I am on him. I'm more likely to sell Gibson right now versus his perceived value than I am to buy or hold.
Yeah, man, I was excited for him for those 2 days where we thought McKissic was a bill because that's what we need unlocked with Gibson is that pass catching ability, which we all thought that was what he was going to be best at coming into the league because he was kind of that hybrid slot receiver running back at Memphis. And I still think he can do it, but Washington so far has not been willing to give him that role. I do think it's worth remembering, he played through that stress fracture in his shin through pretty much all of last season. So I'm willing to, write off maybe some of the dips in efficiency. I still like him as a runner. And again, I still think he can do it in the passing game. He needs the opportunity. McKissic is 28 years old. He's an undersized back. He's coming off a neck injury. So I do think McKissic is more of a short-term concern. But the long-term concern is just, is Washington's coaching staff willing to give Gibson that pass catching role, or are they just going to go sign another pass catching back, when McKissic's time is up?
Well, and of course, if it is really a 2-year deal for McKissic, that could be the extent of Gibson's time in Washington too, because it's, even though we just talked about Conner and Fournette, it's not necessarily a good idea to bet on the long-term outlook for a running back. And I think that's the one other thing to factor in for Gibson is he was an exciting athlete coming into the league. He was not the typical running back prospect, but he also wasn't a super prospect. He never really found his spot in Memphis. He wasn't clearly a lead back coming into the league. So, there's a chance that it's somebody who looks like this rare package who, if you give him workhorse touches, is going to do big things. But I would say overall that's not really how he projects.
He's just tough to figure out because to me, he's been much better as a runner than expected and has been much less productive in the passing game than I expected him to be.
Yeah, not a sell at all costs, but if I find somebody that's willing to buy him in the middle of RB1 range, I'm going to try to work something out. On the fallers side, what do you got? Or do you have any more risers, I guess, before we move on?
No more risers for me. My faller is Nick Chubb, and it might seem counterintuitive when you add a quarterback like Deshaun Watson. It's going to kind of elevate the offense, and I do think that's going to happen. Maybe Chubb scores even more touchdowns, but I think his volume is going to take a hit with Deshaun Watson's arrival. And one, because as we talked about, I think Cleveland's going to pass more. Their pass rate's going to climb. So fewer carries to go around. And I think Deshaun Watson is going to, steal some of those carries. There's only so many, carries to go around. And when you have a quarterback that's going to, be getting 6 to 8 of those per game, versus Baker Mayfield, who was, taking maybe 1 or 2. I just think some of that is going to come out of Nick Chubb's totals. It's tough to imagine him being much more efficient than he's already been. I mean, he's already been averaging over 5 yards per carry every season of his career. It's tough to, go project him for 6 yards per carry just because Watson is there. And then he just, he's still just almost a 0 in the passing game. And I don't see that changing. This all assumes Kareem Hunt hangs around. I have seen him mentioned as a cut candidate. If that happens, then it's kind of, wheels up for Nick Chubb. But if he's still, in a timeshare, and now he's going to see fewer carries and still do nothing in the passing game. I just think, his shorter term value is taking a hit, and he's not super young anymore. I think he's like 26, 27 years old now. So he's kind of at his peak right now. Probably has a few good years left in him, but again, I just think he's taking a hit in the short term.
Yeah, I think he's okay to sell. I wouldn't be looking too hard to sell him. At worst, Kareem Hunt is around for the rest of this year. Then his contract's up after that. It remains a good situation. I think almost all of Deshaun Watson's rushing work is going to come from scrambles as opposed to stealing from him. But I can see that aspect. So I kind of agree with what you say. I'm not worried about Chubb overall, but we're at the peak right now where it's an okay time to sell depending on what you can get for him. Fallers, I have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and I mentioned him a few minutes ago. It's kind of the opposite of Gibson in that I'm not against him because the market is now against him. Just looking back at December in Dynasty League Football, Dynasty ADP, he was RB16. Now here we are in March, he's RB27. And I mean, what has really changed between December and now? They haven't drafted anybody. These prospects are not in the league yet, although they're a bit more into our view at this point. And the Chiefs have signed Ronald Jones. I think that's about as good an addition for CEH's outlook as could have come this offseason. Because I and I'm sure everybody else expected the Chiefs to sign another running back once they let Darrell Williams and Jerick McKinnon hit the open market. Ronald Jones is a good addition, I think, because he hasn't proved to us that he's actually that good at anything in the NFL yet. And he certainly has showed us that he's not a good passing game player. So we should see good passing down work for CEH going forward, perhaps even more than we've seen to this point. And I'm not sure that Ronald Jones steals anything in particular versus what could have landed with him.
Yeah, I think the market is closer to correct on CEH now than they were, back in December. I do think RB27 is kind of close to where he should be valued. The Chiefs obviously thought they were getting a lot more than they've gotten so far when they took him in the first round. I just think now through 2 seasons, what we've seen from CEH, he's been just decently efficient. He's dealt with some injuries. He isn't a smaller back. I think the Chiefs realize he's never going to be that feature back that they can get 15 carries to, plus all the passing game work. I do still think he can be a solid contributor in the passing game. I just think he's going to continue losing carries to someone else, whether it's Ronald Jones or someone else that they add longer term. So again, what's working in his favor is obviously being in a Patrick Mahomes led offense and Andy Reid led offense, and then Tyreek Hill's departure frees up a bunch of targets. So I'm with you. I think if this is kind of it for the Chiefs' additions to the backfield, I think CEH should set new career highs in targets and catches this season. But I don't think he's going to give you big rushing production this season or longer term.
I think we're at a point in the NFL where there are maybe 8 running backs who are not like losing carries to somebody else. So I think that still gets just kind of overplayed in perceptions with running backs where, the RB16 is not anymore a 15 carry a game guy. It's more like a 12 to 14 carry per game player. And if CEH's upside even is RB16, I'll take that versus his RB27 right now.
Sure. Yep, that's fair.
Who else do you have for fallers?
I just said Chubb. I'm trying to be positive today.
All right. I don't care about being positive, so I'm going to mention Aaron Jones, and it's similar fashion. I'm not against Aaron Jones, but the market is. He outcarried A.J. Dillon in the final 2 regular season games that mattered this year. He, of course, sat out basically the final game where they had things clinched. 22-7 lead in opportunities over Dillon in their playoff loss to the 49ers. 12 carries versus 7 for Dillon. All 10 of the targets between them. I think we should look for plenty of targets for Aaron Jones this year. There are cap questions the next 2 seasons, so there's a possibility that he's not on the team beyond this coming year. But if you're looking at Spot Track, $9.6 million in dead cap for 2023, which will be Aaron Jones's age 29 campaign. So I think versus where he's perceived right now, Aaron Jones is somebody to buy for production over the next 2 years in PPR leagues.
To me, Jones was and still is the biggest winner in Green Bay from the Davante Adams trade, and we've seen it in the last 7 games. Davante Adams has missed. Jones has averaged 6.7 targets and 5.1 catches per game. So I think he's going to get the target boost with Devonta Adams out of the picture. To me, when I was going back and doing Packers projections last month, I was surprised at how good AJ Dillon has been in the passing game so far as a pro. He did nothing in the passing game in college, but he's been effective there. So I do think, he can eat into Aaron Jones' passing game a little bit, but I just think, the fact that I'd be more worried about Jones if Adams was still there. Adams leaving has me a lot more optimistic about Jones for at least the next, basically for as long as Aaron Rodgers sticks around with the Packers.
Yeah, I think the question is whether Green Bay can keep scoring touchdowns as often as they have in recent seasons without Devontae Adams, but you don't have to bet on the high end of that to still have Aaron Jones be a central part and maybe in for more touches in that offense now.
Yep, agreed.
Any value targets on the market beyond guys we've already talked about?
I mean, Travis Etienne is someone I'm trying to get wherever I can at this point. So he's RB19 in that recent startup ADP over at DLF. We have him a few spots higher than that in our rankings. Even a few spots when you're talking about, top 20 running back is pretty significant. I'm just still willing to bet on the prospect profile we saw coming out of Clemson. Just big rushing production, big receiving production at a big time school against tough competition at Clemson. And really with the Jags, I'm just giving the entire team a mulligan for whatever that was last season under Urban Meyer. I think the entire offense, with a new coaching staff, with some additions they made at wide receiver and bringing Evan Ingram. And I just think that offense is about to take a leap forward. And James Robinson is a total question mark for the start of the season with his injury. So I think now is, probably your last chance to acquire Travis Etienne for, relatively cheaply.
We're above consensus, and I think even we're low on Travis Etienne. I'm buying this offseason as well. And he's the kind of guy that I'm willing to take a big swing on, even if it ends up being a whiff, because I think the payoff could be huge. I think that he is the type of player who could, by next year, be a top 4 consideration for drafts at the position. And, the downside is that he just disappoints, and I'm willing to take that shot and just, reload after that. But, why is he not Alvin Kamara with a better talent and production profile coming out of college, or DeAndre Swift with better profiles coming out of college? I mean, all those guys are good players. Obviously, Swift and Kamara have already done something in the NFL, but Etienne was a first-round pick, was not a guy that people didn't think belonged that high versus running backs, unless you just don't think running backs belong that high at all, but felt like he belonged in that range. Now he's in an offense that has a much better coaching staff. He's playing with his college quarterback. James Robinson is effectively out of the way. We'll see about his Achilles as we get closer to the season, but there's a significant chance that James Robinson is not ready to be a factor this season, and thus opens up the job for Etienne. So I'm just going to go ahead and buy him here. I like him better than the entire rookie class in terms of valuations going forward.
Yeah, I think he looks like a better prospect than anyone in this incoming class. We'll see where those guys land. And we do have Etienne returning from the list, Frank. That can be a tough injury to return from. It's not a major concern for me. It's just something to keep an eye on this offseason. But he's clearly ahead of James Robinson in their rehabs. I think Etienne's supposed to be ready for the entire offseason program. So I mean, he could be there with Kamara and Swift, in 6 months. Just the difference with Etienne, we just haven't seen it at the NFL level. That's the only difference. As a prospect, Alvin Kamara was my comp for Etienne coming into the league. Just someone who's probably not going to get 18 carries a game, but can get 12 to 14 and do a whole lot in the passing game.
Yeah, and I mean that's the key in Dynasty is you got to buy it before you see it, and you need to decide whether you're willing to buy that. Haven't seen it yet, with Etienne, I'm willing to, even if it ends up being the wrong call.
Me too.
Miles Sanders is another guy that I'm buying. He's heading into the final year of his contract, so there's some uncertainty, but I think he's a guy who can kind of fit into that mold of James Conner, Leonard Fournette, giving us hope for what we can expect going forward. Even Rashad Penny, who disappointed more than Miles Sanders for sure over his first few seasons, had last season's rebound, got some money on the open market from Seattle this year. So I think Miles Sanders, the perception on him now has him down in RB3 range, even in redraft, where I think the path to production for this season is even easier than it is to see for his long term. For 2021, he was 7th in rushing DVOA. That number has improved each season he's been in the league so far. His yards before contact per attempt improved each of the past 2 years. He has improved his tackle breaking rates and yards after reception last year. So I think it's a guy that looks good as a player whose opportunity is there. I mean, you have to figure it out. You don't know for sure what his touch counts are going to be this year, but it's not hard to create the path in your mind for Miles Sanders to plenty of work this year. So I like him much more than where the market has him right now.
I'm with you there. I think Sanders' 2021 was, maybe the strangest among any like fantasy relevant running back. You remember the Eagles started the season super pass heavy, so people were complaining that Sanders wasn't getting enough carries. As soon as Philly made that shift to go run heavy, that's when Sanders got hurt with the ankle injury. He came back, and in like the 4 games he played later on in the season, he got fat. He was averaging like 15, 16 carries per game. So that was encouraging. The other thing with Sanders last season, he didn't score a single touchdown on 137 carries, which is just, super. That's going to regress back in his favor this coming season. So I'm with you. He's not even 25 years old yet either. So, he entered the league as a super young prospect. So I like that call. I would rather have Sanders straight up over Clyde Edwards-Helaire at this point. And Sanders is like 7 or 8 spots below CEH in the Dynasty startup ADP.
Yeah, I agree with that. Other players worth discussing, Saquon Barkley. And I guess let me hear, I know where I stand on Saquon Barkley. How do you feel about Saquon Barkley heading into this season?
I mean, it's just we've seen nothing. We've gotten nothing from him for 2 years now. So you're kind of, you're leaning on his first couple seasons in the NFL. You're leaning on the prospect profile, which, what was elite. He was an elite looking prospect coming out. He was a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. He's also still just 25 years old. So, despite him already playing 4 years in the NFL, he is still he's basically at peak age and experience based on, again, those aging curves we looked at this offseason. He's like at his peak right now, which, people might, think he's beyond that just for how long he's been in the NFL. But, again, just 25 years old. And I'm bullish on the Giants offense with the new coaching staff there. There's enough weapons where I think, that could be, it should be a much better offense than what we saw last season. So I'm not like gung ho going out and buying Saquon Barkley, because I do think there are concerns just with all the injuries that have piled up over the past couple of seasons. But I would also not be surprised if he, rebounds and finishes as a top 5 running back this season. If that happens, you're talking about a guy who just finished top 5 and he's, going to be just 26 entering the 2023 season. Then you're talking about, a top 6, 7 dynasty running back.
I would say that I'm closer to gung-ho, especially in a marketplace where running backs don't tend to be highly valued. So I think it's probably easier to grab him than it would be a comparable wide receiver. As a rookie, he posted the number 15 PPR season ever for running backs. He set rookie records for receptions and PPR points by a running back. He then navigated a high ankle sprain right toward the beginning of year 2. I think it was like week 4 of that season where he suffered that injury, came back. His production was lower after he returned, and he also had a rookie quarterback in the lineup at that point. ACL tear, obviously, in week 2 of 2020 ended that season. It really seemed to doom last season as well, when he was not at full strength at the start of the year and then had Joe Judge's staff in charge of the offense. So, I mean, things worked dramatically against him over the past 2 years. So I'm much more willing to overlook that and, make a relative bet on what happened the first 2 seasons. I'm not saying giving whatever it takes to get Barkley, but versus where his perception is right now, I'm much more willing to bet that he rebounds into something good. And, like you said, it's a coaching staff that seems more worth betting on going forward. And just, we're talking dynasty here, but his redraft perception, he's in round 3 of underdog drafts. So nobody is saying Saquon Barkley is definitely still a stud.
Yeah, I think he's a better value in redraft right now. Like, I'm gobbling him up in the 3rd round because I expect him to be on the Giants. By the way, I know there have been some trade rumors, but I don't think a team is gonna swing a trade for Barkley. Meaning if they did, I don't think they're probably going to give up enough for what the Giants would want for him. But I'm taking him in the 3rd round all day in redraft. He's RB11 in the Dynasty ADP, which I'm okay buying him there. I don't think he's like a screaming value. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to be a screaming value there, but I definitely like him ahead of some of the guys who are ahead of him in our rankings, for example.
I mean, Derrick Henry is ahead of Barkley in the startup ADP. I'd rather have Saquon Barkley. I know Henry's been healthier recently, but I mean, he's 28 years old now. He has a lot more career touches, on his tires at this point. So I'd rather gamble on Barkley, who's like 3 years younger right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I might even be willing to give a 2022 rookie pick. Like, obviously depending on where it is, but maybe no matter where it is for Barkley, because I think his upside might be higher than anybody who's in this incoming class.
It is, yeah. I mean, at that point, you're just giving up, the longevity for, the higher upside in Barkley.
Mm-hmm. Leonard Fournette we have down. I think we kind of already covered him in the James Conner section, though, right?
Yeah, he's rich man's James Conner. Like, you're going to get RB1 production this year. You're probably not getting a whole lot long term, but I mean, if you're in win now mode, Fournette's definitely someone I'd be looking to acquire right now.
Yeah, and you're probably not finding somebody who's breathlessly chasing after him if you're looking to sell. Michael Carter's last running back I want to talk about, and it's just because I wonder if this is a sell window right now. It's at least a point where I would be willing to sell, because I'm not sure we can reasonably expect Michael Carter to be more than Chase Edmonds in the league. And, I don't say that to denigrate him, because that would be a positive career for Michael Carter if he is Chase Edmonds, obviously based on the production and the money to this point. But I think it's a replaceable fantasy asset. So I think right now could be a good time to look into selling, because I think there's a solid chance that the Jets add a running back, and it could even be like an early day 2 type.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Now, I mean, now so far, Michael Carter has escaped free agency without any significant competition. The Jets brought back Tevin Coleman, and that's been all they've done in the backfield. We'll have to see what the draft brings. I mean, what I keep going back to with Carter, and what makes me hesitant to really go all in on him is just the fact that he was a 4th-round pick. Like, in 4th-round picks, historically, the team is just not super committed to them. Now, I thought Carter was better than a 4th-round pick as a prospect, and I thought what he did last year as a rookie was, better than what you get from most 4th-round picks. But, as you said, I would not be surprised if the Jets make a, pretty significant addition in the draft next month.
Yeah, and it's certainly worth mentioning that it was a limited sample over which he did that stuff, and did get hurt as a smaller back in his first season.
Yep.
Okay, on to wide receivers, and we'll start with risers. Who you got in that section, Jared?
So I got some obvious ones. I mean, Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton, obviously getting Russell Wilson, just a massive, massive quarterback upgrade. To me, CeeDee Lamb is pretty obvious. Like, when he was drafted by Dallas, the concern was the target competition. But now Amari Cooper is out of the way. Michael Gallup is, iffy for the start of the season with his ACL tear. So, Lamb has a chance now to just gobble up targets. 3 other guys I have here. Juju Smith-Schuster. He couldn't have landed in a better spot. Not only does he land on the Chiefs, but he lands on the Chiefs without Tyreek Hill. So, I still have questions about Juju. I think he's someone worth debating, but just, from a landing spot, I think, it turned out about as well as possible for him. Mike Williams is a riser to me. Just, being tied to Justin Herbert for 3 more years. He got the 3-year, $60 million deal. And beyond that, Keenan Allen turns 30 next month, and Mike Williams was better than him in yards per route run last season. Mike Williams was better in PFF receiving grade. So I just think there's a chance Williams, even this year, kind of emerges as Justin Herbert's number 1 wide receiver. And the last guy for me is a riser, Gabriel Davis, who he dodged free agency. Emmanuel Sanders still not re-signed by Buffalo. Don't think he's going to be. Cole Beasley gone. They did, sign his replacement in Jamison Crowder. But as things stand now, like, Davis is the outside starter opposite Stephon Diggs. We still have the NFL draft to get through. The Bills have a later 1st-round pick. You've seen some wide receivers mocked there to them. That'd obviously be bad news for Gabriel Davis, but he's like 75% of the way there to, being a starter for the Bills this coming season.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's still probably overrated perception-wise versus reality. And if I had him, I would still be curious to see what the market price is. That said, if you have him and you like him, then he is well worth holding on to at this point, because the outlook is potentially very good. So we'll see where Gabe Davis goes. I've got the other part of that Kansas City situation as the bigger riser, and not because I think Marquez Valdes-Scantling is more valuable than Juju at this point, but versus their relative dynasty perceptions coming into this offseason, I think there's a bigger leap for MVS. I would like Juju better if he had gotten the kind of contract that Kansas City gave to MVS. And I know that all the numbers on both of these are fake, and there are a wide range of actual real life values to them. But what we do have in the Valdes-Scantling contract is that it is 3 years. So if he does make it through what is effectively a 1-year prove it deal, the team already has that second year built in to keep him for, and then a third year if if he really performs well for them. So we might have 3 years of MVS in Kansas City. With Juju Smith-Schuster, who knows exactly what else he was offered on the open market, but this is the second straight offseason where he could not do better than a 1-year deal. So I remain wary of him. I'm not going to buy him versus where he is market-wise, but I'm at least open to the possibility that he rebounds, is a valuable performer going forward. My bet would be that he just kind of settles into being an okay fantasy receiver from this point forward.
Yeah, I mean, Juju obviously has been a massive disappointment for 3 years now. So it's not just like it was 1 year, not even just 2 years. It's been 3 years where he's been disappointing. But I still go back to those first 2 seasons. I mean, he has the 11th most receiving yards through 2 NFL seasons in NFL history. So I mean, it was a historic first 2 seasons of his career. So maybe that's still in there again. I think if it is, like we're gonna see it in Kansas City without Tyreek Hill with Mahomes. It's just a perfect spot for him. I'll be curious to see where MVS lands when we get some April Dynasty startup ADP, because he's still a wide receiver 75 for March, but the majority or maybe all of those drafts happened before we learned that MVS would be in Kansas City. But I mean, we've already heard that Kansas City is in the market for a big name wide receiver via trade. They have a couple first round picks now, so I think there's a good chance to add someone there. So I just think this Kansas City wide receiver room is not finished yet, and I just think MVS is never going to be a lead target. I just think kind of is what he is. He was like a 12 to 15% target share guy in Green Bay. I do think he can top that in Kansas City, without a Devontae Adams there. But I just don't think you're going to get even 20% target share out of him. I just think, he's kind of going to be that secondary piece, which is valuable when it's, with Patrick Mahomes. So again, I'm definitely buying if he's, anywhere near wide receiver 75 in Dynasty ADP. I've even, seen he's still going too late, I think, in some of these redrafts. At least he was immediately after he signed with Kansas City. I'm not sure where he's settling in at this point. But I'm buying, just not viewing him as like a difference maker, a league winner in fantasy. I think if you're expecting that, you're expecting too much out of MVS.
I agree with that. I don't think either of these guys is going to be a league winner. So I'll wait around and take the one that I can take, wide receiver 50 and still be ahead of market if I'm doing a startup or a redraft, as opposed to Juju where he's going. But curious to see how this all settles out and who else lands here. We've talked about the Broncos situation. I just want to kind of emphasize that I think all of the Broncos receivers are risers with Russell Wilson arriving. I don't think you have to pick a favorite. And frankly, I'm not ready to tie myself to any single Broncos wideout as the favorite here. I don't know that I'm going to go buy either of the top 2 guys versus where they are market-wise right now. But if I have Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton, I'm excited about Russell Wilson arriving. We've seen what he's done for Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf together and other wide receivers before that. We talked about his efficiency. He's just one of the most efficient quarterbacks ever. So it's obviously an upgrade for all the receivers. Judy's now inside our top 20. Cortland Sutton is right around 30. I think it's also great for Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler. They're a little bit sneakier, and you might think, well, they can only have so many targets to go around. That's where Dynasty comes in. It's okay if KJ Hamler doesn't do anything in 2022, which I'm not betting that he does, but at some point they're not going to be able to pay all of these guys. And even if KJ Hamler moves on somewhere else, there's still that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if that's the negative case scenario for Hamler. So I think all of these guys get a boost. They all got more interesting when Russell Wilson arrived.
Yeah, Patrick's the guy I actually wanted to talk about. I actually had him down here anyways. Patrick finished ahead of Judy and Sutton in PFF receiving grade last season, and he beat Cortland Sutton in yards per route run. And remember, Denver gave him an extension this past November, 3 years, $34 million. So that's solid money. And he's going to be the third receiver. Like, I think Judy and Sutton are better than Patrick. I think they're going to play ahead of him. I think they're going to see more targets. But the number 3 receiver in a Russell Wilson led offense is a lot more exciting than it was with Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater, whatever else Denver is throwing out there the previous couple of years. So I think Patrick has an end of bench stash in Dynasty. He's probably still relatively cheap to acquire. I think he's someone worth looking into over these next couple months.
And that third wide receiver spot is especially more attractive with Noah Fant gone and without the coaching staff that had a Melvin Gordon / Javonte Williams led offense running the ball a lot. So yeah, I agree.
Exactly.
There's probably more targets available. And I mean, we haven't gotten to tight ends yet, but Albert Okweg-Bunum, obviously, it probably got the biggest boost relative to the starting point out of all of these guys because Noah Fant's gone and Russell Wilson's here. So any piece that you have in the Denver passing game looks much better now than it did not so long ago.
For sure.
On the faller side is the other side of the Russell Wilson trade. Tyler Lockett is the one that bothers me a lot. He's perennially been the guy that I look at in our postseason dynasty rankings when we go to make, like our big refresh. And I always say, Tyler Lockett's too low. You guys got to move him up. It's a lot tougher to make that case now. I think the only way to like Tyler Lockett at the moment is to bet on a trade, and how many places could he really go that would be comparable to playing with Russell Wilson. So he still doesn't turn 30 until September. So I'm not totally out on him. I'm not selling him for anything I can get, but his contract does look tough to move. I'm no contract expert. So if you look at the stuff on Spot Track, it looks like it might be tough to actually find a trade partner for him. So he's probably stuck in Seattle. We'll see who the quarterback is. I think it gets better if Baker Mayfield signs with Seattle. Maybe there are some other upgrades there over Drew Lock, but in general, I'm not as rosy on Tyler Lockett at this point in the year as I usually am. And I'm far more concerned about the impact on him than I am for DK Metcalf, who hasn't even turned 25 yet.
Yeah, I mean, Lockett's a really good player, but he was definitely elevated by Russell Wilson. Just Russell Wilson's quality and just the fit. They just had such a good rapport. So it definitely hurts. As you mentioned, his age too. Lockett entering year 8, which if you look at our aging curves, that's kind of where you start to get into the danger zone for wide receiver. That's kind of where you first start to see a notable decline. So yeah, again, he's probably a tough guy to sell at this point with the Wilson news. But again, if you're a rebuilding team, it might even be worth selling a bit low on Lockett right now just to get out from under him, because I do think he's going to take a big hit without Russ.
Any other fallers you have?
I had Jalen Waddle. Again, just going back to the Tyreek Hill trade, I just think when someone of Hill's caliber comes along, and listen, I think Waddle was a nice looking prospect. He had a really nice rookie year. But his fantasy production, for the most part, came from the volume. He saw 140 targets. That was 10th most among wide receivers. He's just not going to get that type of volume for as long as Tyreek Hill is there. Plus the fact that, again, I think Miami probably goes a bit run heavier with Mike McDaniel there than they were last season. So I just think Waddle's volume takes a hit, and volume is so important in fantasy. Long term, he's still going to be okay because Tyreek Hill is not going to be there forever. But short term matters more than long term to me in Dynasty. And I think, again, Waddle took a hit there.
Man, if they go run heavier after paying for Tyreek Hill and only having Chase Edmonds and Raheem Mostert in the backfield, I think that would go against Mike McDaniel being a smart coach.
They're not going to be like Kyle Shanahan 49ers level run heavy. Again, I don't think they're going to be in the top 5 in pass rate this coming season. Again, we don't know anything about McDaniel. I'm basing that just a lot on the Kyle Shanahan tree he comes from. I had him like kind of middle of the pack in pass rate. That might be a bit low. I just don't think there's going to be enough volume to go around to support Waddle as like a top 15 wide receiver this season, or really as long as Tyreek Hill's there.
Yeah, I'm certainly with that, but I would probably lean toward them being somewhere in the top 3rd in terms of passing lean. Michael Thomas is the other faller I want to mention, and not really necessarily because he's falling right now, but he just hasn't ever rebounded after his fall the past 2 years. He's wide receiver 43 on Keep Trade Cut, which if you're not familiar, it's the site that asks you to rate guys, Keep Trade Cut, which basically ranks 3 players that pop up when you look at them. And then it kind of puts all that together into these rankings. So he's wide receiver 43 by that measure. If you look on the Fantasy Pros expert consensus, he's wide receiver 30, which is close to where we have him, but that ranges from somebody who has him at wide receiver 24 to somebody who has him at wide receiver 42. So I think there's going to be a wide range of valuations on Michael Thomas. And I think anywhere that it's at or below where we have him, and that's low wide receiver 3 range, I'm much more likely to buy, at the very least holding, than I am selling. Because the downside for him is that he comes back and his playing is actually giving us something, which he did in the past 2 years. And it's just disappointing versus what we got before. He can do that and be a wide receiver 3 without a problem, because he's still going to be the dominant number 1 target in New Orleans. You could say we haven't seen him play without Drew Brees enough yet to know what that looks like. That's certainly true. we also haven't seen him play without Drew Brees to know that he won't be a wide receiver one with another quarterback. Yeah. And it's going to be Jameis Winston as the starter as long as he's healthy over the next 2 years in New Orleans. The last time Jameis Winston was a starter was in Tampa in 2019. Chris Godwin finished second. Mike Evans finished fourth in PPR points per game. So we know that at peak, at least, Jameis Winston is capable of supporting some fantasy production at wide receiver. Michael Thomas, certainly getting up there. He's 29. He's had 5 seasons of action. Last year was his 6th season, so didn't play that year. You talked to Jared about the peak, and it's right around that 5th season for the wide receivers. So, he's going to be on the downside at this point. But I think that there's still the chance that we steal one more wide receiver 1 season, 1 or 2 wide receiver 2 seasons from Michael Thomas. I'm willing at this, depressed price to take a shot on that and, incur whatever the downside risk is. Then okay. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm much more willing to pay and take a shot on that upside than to be scared off of him by what the downside is.
Yeah, to me, I mean, if you're a contending team and you're getting Thomas around wide receiver 40 cost, that's where I'd be willing to go in on him. Otherwise, he's probably just kind of a shy away. There's just so much unknown with him. And you mentioned it all, the significant injury, quarterback who he's never played with before, Sean Payton gone from New Orleans for the first time in 15 years. So that offense in general is just tough to project. It's tough to project Michael Thomas for 22 obviously, and that makes him tough to project long term. So he's a guy, again, I'd be willing to buy low on if I'm contending, and like you said, you hope to get 1 or 2 more top 20 fantasy seasons out of him.
Yeah, and I'd be more worried about the Sean Payton factor if he was like wide receiver 18. But if we're talking bottom of wide receiver 3 and into the 40s, it's like, I don't care who the coach is. He's going to get thrown to.
No, that's fair. I would not be shocked if the Saints are like a bottom 10 offense this season with all the changes happening there.
Mm-hmm. Any other value targets for you at wide receiver?
No other value targets for me.
I'm going to go ahead and mention Brandon Cooks, who I think should just be mentioned in this section perennially at this point. He just looks like a perennial buy because nobody's excited about Brandon Cooks. Wide receiver 37 in Fantasy Pros Dynasty consensus right now, and none of the 42 rankers in that system right now has him higher than 31st. So that's the peak value, is wide receiver 31 right now. Well, last season he finished wide receiver 21 in PPR points on a career low in yards per target and in probably about as bad a situation as he could have been. Tyrod Taylor was the season opening starter. Davis Mills was the ceiling option at quarterback there. I mean, Mills played better than we could have expected, but that's still not the ceiling of what his quarterback is this year, probably not even the floor. So the other part of this, the unknown with Brandon Cooks, is that if he's traded, and his contract does look tradable, he turns 29 in September, he's in the final year of his deal. So it's not at all crazy to imagine the possibility of him getting traded. Imagine if Brandon Cooks is traded to Kansas City next week.
That's what I was thinking.
And you're like, oh my God, I could have had Brandon Cooks as a wide receiver 3, and now he's like 15th in the rankings. I messed up. So, I mean, I'm not saying bet on that, but the worst case is that he's the number 1 receiver in Houston, which worked out for him fantasy-wise last year, and he's not even quite 29 yet. So I'm not worried too much about any steep decline for him just yet.
I mean, he just goes for 1,000 yards no matter where he is. He's been on 4 different teams now. Goes for 1,000 yards for all of them. Just a really good player, like you said. Always seems to be underrated. I mean, we have Cooks at wide receiver 16 for 2022 right now. And again, like you said, that's on Houston, which is kind of the worst spot he could be on. If he gets traded, most places he might even climb the rankings. So again, not a long term guy because he is 29 years old. But for contending teams, like I would rather have Brandon Cooks than Michael Thomas if you're looking for a trade target for a contending dynasty team right now.
And we like to talk about long term, but I mean, is Brandon Cooks not going to last the next 3 years? I'd say there's a solid to good chance that he's around for 3 more years. And then what is long term beyond that? I mean, you have 3 more years to build your team around him. So sure, if that's all you're depending on, 5 years down the road, then that's a mistake. But there's plenty of time to do other things and also incorporate aging receivers.
For sure.
I have Davante Adams down as a discussion. I'm not sure how much there is to say about him at this point, though. It's not a huge downgrade. What do you have on Davante Adams?
I'm in. I mean, he's another older guy, so he's not like someone you're gonna get 10 more years out of. But I think you can get another 3-4 quality seasons out of him. I think the efficiency is very likely going to decline when you go from Aaron Rodgers to Derek Carr. But I still think he's going to be among the top 5 receivers in targets this season. He saw massive target shares in Green Bay. That's probably going to come down in Vegas when you have Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller there. But Green Bay was also a super slow and low play volume offense for the past 3 seasons under LaFleur. I think that's probably going to climb now in Vegas now with Josh McDaniels there. Bill Belichick, McDaniels from that tree tends to run faster paced offenses, at least when he has a quality quarterback, which I think they have there in Carr. So we don't have Adams for that fewer targets in Vegas as we did in Green Bay. So he's still, to me, a top 5 receiver for this season, and he's still a top 10 dynasty receiver. And I think in a lot of cases, the owner in your league might be willing to sell him for cheaper than that.
Yeah, I think there's a slight knock in the move from Green Bay to Vegas because of the extra target challengers. But, for all the factors you mentioned, we shouldn't overrate that. He's probably not going to be a 28 to 30% target share, but he should still be around 25% and could be upgrading the offense. Darren Waller is 30. Coming off an injury-plagued year and has no guaranteed money on the final year of his contract, which is next season, 2023. So, I'd say that it's not likely that Darren Waller is around for a lot longer, and we'll see what he's got this year and next. Derek Carr is certainly not likely to be as efficient as Aaron Rodgers, who has been historically efficient, but Derek Carr has not dipped below 67% completions since 2017, completed 68.7% of his passes over the past 4 years, a pretty good 7.8 yards per pass attempt over the past 3, despite iffy wide receivers in that span. Touchdowns are probably coming down, but if we're getting similar targets for Davante Adams, I think we'll get a similar catch rate. We should get similar yardage. I think that Davante Adams should be fine where he is. It seems like public perception doesn't have him much below where he was with Green Bay.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've heard, but Adams and Carr played together in college. So, there is some chemistry there.
Yeah, they're best friends, I've learned. So the last guy in the receiver section is Calvin Ridley. And obviously the real answer on what to do with Calvin Ridley is a shrug emoji. But we have to make a decision. I think in most cases, you probably have to just hold Calvin Ridley. The bigger question, I guess, Jared, is how much would it take for you to sell him if you do have him? Obviously not as much right now as it would have, a year or even 6 months ago.
Yeah, probably not a whole lot, honestly. And I don't have any Calvin Ridley in Dynasty because I was not a fan of him coming into the league. That's obviously proven to be wrong. But I mean, at this point, so he's gonna, I guess theoretically return in 2023. He still needs to be reinstated. I assume that's going to happen for 2023. But at that point, he's going to have only played 5 games over the previous 2 seasons. Remember, he missed almost all of this past season, and he'll already be 28 years old when he returns next season. So, he's not even going to be a young wide receiver anymore at that point. So, I mean, there's just too much downside to Ridley for me to really even consider going out and buying him right now. And as far as selling him, like if I can get anything that I think is going to, help my team this coming season for the next few seasons, I'd be willing to, consider moving Ridley for that piece.
I offered Adam Krautwurst, our pal, a 3rd-round pick in the upcoming rookie draft for Ridley. Do you think you would have sold?
No. I'd probably sell him for a second, though. Definitely like an early 2nd rounder. I'd sell Ridley for that right now.
What about 2/3?
See, to me, and I'm sure there's data that either refutes or supports this, but once you get into the 3rd round of dynasty drafts, those are just like total lottery tickets. They're, often going to do nothing for your fantasy team. So you could give me 4/3. I'd probably rather have an early 2nd than like 4/3.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I was offering stuff in that range, because I think especially in the FFPC format, Ridley loses value because you have smaller rosters than you do in a lot of other dynasty formats. Yep. We're cutting down to 16 by tomorrow is the deadline, the end of March 31st. You have to get your dynasty rosters down to 16 on myffpc.com. And then even the regular season is just 20 roster spots with 2 IR slots. So in that format, I'm just not willing to give up a whole lot to get Calvin Ridley. Here's where Keep Trade Cut had him valued. And this is a 1 quarterback format, half PPR scoring, I believe was the setting. So he is valued behind David Bell, behind Sky Moore, among other rookies. Those obviously aren't the top 2 rookie wide receivers in this group. Behind an early second-round pick in 2024 and behind a mid-second-round pick in 2022. I feel like in each of those 4 specific cases, I would rather have Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, again, for like if we're talking rookie picks, it's like a early to mid second is kind of where would kind of be the tipping point for me for Ridley. And full disclosure, I'm not even like done, kind of studying this draft class yet, but just from what I've kind of seen so far, that's kind of the level of pick I would want for Calvin Ridley. And of course, it depends like where your team is, whether you're competing or not, kind of, what you should be doing with Ridley.
Yeah. And I think that that's a level that's fair. If somebody said, hey, I traded Calvin Ridley for a second-round pick in the upcoming rookie draft, what do you think? I'd be like, that's fine. We have no idea what to expect from him going forward. And, there's a chance that guy is good.
Yep.
That guy being what you would get for that second-round pick, of course. We had one trade question come through. I asked for some and, didn't get enough responses, but we should address the one that we did get from Jacob Blackburn. He traded Josh Palmer for Ronald Jones in a 14-team PPR Superflex Dynasty League. So wants to know which side got the better of that, giving up Josh Palmer, getting back Ronald Jones.
Yeah, I mean, I think both guys are like long shots to be like, weekly reliable fantasy starters. I'd probably rather take a shot on Palmer, though, just a guy who we haven't really seen fail as much as we've seen Ronald Jones fail. So if Palmer, I didn't love Palmer coming out last year, but he actually had a pretty solid rookie season, when he got opportunities. And he's a wide receiver tied to Justin Herbert. Again, I mentioned Keenan Allen, who's 30 years old. I don't have his contract. I don't know how long he's locked in with the Chargers for. But I mean, there's a chance Palmer's like the longer term replacement for Keenan Allen, maybe as the number 2 wide receiver for Justin Herbert. So I would lean Palmer over Rojo.
I think that's a good example of a trade that makes sense for both sides, because I don't know the specifics of either side of that, but I would assume that one side needed some running back help and the other side didn't need Ronald Jones and was willing to take a shot on an upside young receiver. So I think it's a fair deal, because I think Ronald Jones is more likely to be valuable in 2022. And he's still young enough that there's a chance he does some stuff beyond that and is helpful. And we're talking about a 14-team league. So, we need an even deeper pool of players than you do for the typical league. So I think Ronald Jones is the better bet for 2022 production. I think long-term Josh Palmer has more upside, but I'm also not betting big on Josh Palmer, and I'm not scared to give him up to get something to help my team.
Agreed.
All right, so let's wrap things up with tight end. I think we kind of have to start by talking about Travis Kelce. Like, we'll skip over Kyle Pitts because he's number 1 for everybody at this point, because he's young, because he got a bunch of targets last year, and because he was fine, even though he didn't score any touchdowns in a terrible offense. So we'll start with Travis Kelce, who had been the number 1 longer than anybody should reasonably be so at tight end. And I wonder, Jared, if you might have one final sell window on Travis Kelce right now to a win now team at least.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the Tyreek Hill trade, it did for me. It boosted Kelce's short-term value. And I know people are gonna say he's gonna see more bracket coverage now, blah blah blah. Like he's gonna get more targets with Tyreek Hill out of the way, and that's all I care about. And Kelce's target share had actually been sinking. Just 21% last season. That was well below where he was the previous 3 seasons. But I think, I think he's going to get back up to 23, 24, 25% this season. So, I mean, with Kelce, it's just, how long is he going to do it for you? He's 33 years old now. He turns 33 in October, so he's well past the peak age for tight end. He's at a point now where it won't be surprising if we see his play just, drop off significantly at any time now. But for win now teams, I still think, Kelce is a good bat, again, with the target share with Mahomes to, give you elite production for this season. So he's a guy, if you're a win now team, I'd be looking to go out and acquire if you don't have a top 5 tight end.
Yeah, and I would take a shot on selling Travis Kelce now, not selling him for whatever you can get, because I do think that it's okay to just have a guy until he retires. Obviously, the best case scenario is to get lots of value, then trade a player before he falls off a cliff for something of good value. But it's okay to just have a guy who is valuable until the end of his career be on your team. So I do that said, I do think that there's potential for a sell window on Kelce now. He's a top 50 overall asset on that keep trade cut list that I've mentioned before. He is tight end 3 in the Fantasy Pros Dynasty consensus. At least some folks on there have him in as the number 2 tight end, even for Dynasty purposes. Jared mentioned he turns 33 in October. He is signed through 2025, but if you look further into his contract, the dead cap numbers are reduced and declining beyond this coming season. The cap hits are ballooning. So we could see as soon as next year, Travis Kelce just not make sense contractually for the Chiefs. And we've seen the Chiefs with the Tyreek Hill move, kind of come to grips with their own mortality in terms of players that they can keep. So I would look into trading Kelce right now. Again, not selling too low because he can still produce for you.
Yep, agreed.
George Kittle is the next tight end, and I think that there's some overreaction here, but I also think it depends on where you're looking for the reaction. So it first popped up for me, Jared, when I saw his ranking in our system. We talked about the new format for our Dynasty rankings, and George Kittle came out a lot lower than I expected him to. So I wonder if it was an effect of the cautious 2022 projection for him. So instead of calling out where he was ranked, I want to ask you where you think George Kittle belongs among Dynasty tight ends right now.
Yeah, so a lot of where he landed in our Dynasty rankings is because we do have him lower than consensus for 2022. The other part of it is that Kittle's now entering year 6, and our data shows that year 4 and 5 is the peak years for tight end. So he is now on the decline of the tight end aging curve. Beyond that, so Kittle's target share has now shrunk in the last 3 seasons. He was 27% in 2019, 23% in 2020, 21.5% last year. And that's only including his healthy games, by the way. I omitted all the games that he missed or left injured. And I'm not sure that's going to rebound when you have Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk there in San Francisco now. And I think there's, further past volume concerns in San Francisco if we're assuming Trey Lance is going to take over. So Kittle to me is kind of like, I think he's a bit overvalued for 2022. And then I think, he is past peak age for Dynasty. So I think, we've kind of already gotten the best we're going to get George Kittle. So I don't know. He's a guy I'd consider selling because, he's kind of not at that point where Kelce is, where people are like worried about, his age and the decline coming. I think now could be like peak time to sell George Kittle.
So what number do you think he belongs ranking-wise among Dynasty tight ends?
Right where we have him, tight end 7.
Ooh, see, I don't agree with that at all. I don't think he needs to rebound target share-wise to be good. I mean, 20+% is a strong number at tight end. It's like top 4 number perennially at the position. So I would keep him up there with that. I think if we're assuming that Trey Lance is good enough to, keep the offense moving and keep the job, we should probably bet on one of his primary receiving options. So I think there's room for the touchdowns to improve, the yardage to at least stay there with George Kittle. And I mean, for me, he's not old enough yet that I'm worried about him. And the other part of that is there's just so little to like at tight end that even if it's just 2 good seasons from George Kittle and then he falls off, I mean, am I trading that away to get whatever Mike Gesicki has ahead of him, or even Pat Freiermuth? Like, I don't think that the ceiling for Pat Freiermuth at any point matches what George Kittle's ceiling is over the next 2 years.
No, yeah, I mean, definitely like Kittle over. I guess the 3 guys we have ahead of Kittle that you disagree with and might be controversial. The first we have at number 6 is Darren Waller, who is, similar age to George Kittle. My projections had Waller coming in quite a bit ahead of Kittle as far as 2022. So that's kind of why the edge went there. And then it's TJ Hawkinson and Dallas Goedert, who are just, 4 or 5 years younger than George Kittle. I think, their fantasy value this season is not too far off from Kittle. I think I actually have Goedert projected ahead of Kittle this season. So that, again, that's kind of when you throw that into our new algorithm here, that's why Kittle came out where he did.
I have to look up Dallas Goedert's age now because I wasn't. Are he and George Kittle that far apart?
He's 27, and what we said, Kittle's 29, so 2 years apart.
To me, 27 to 29 is not a big issue, and I think that they're similar in terms of their situations with, I don't know, if we are looking at draft capital spent on Trey Lance versus Jalen Hurts, then the Kittle situation seems more predictable, and we also have a better record of production there.
Again, I think this largely comes back to just where I have Kittle projected for this season, which, we haven't really argued out yet. We'll probably do that after the NFL draft. My last note about Kittle, and I'm sure it's like this with a lot of tight ends, but it seems more pronounced with him, is he is just so volatile from week to week. And it's been talked about largely because he's such a good blocker that he doesn't have as high of a route rate as a lot of these other elite tight ends. So he to me, it seems like, and again, I'd have to actually go look at the numbers, but it seems like he has more duds than a lot of these other high-end tight ends do.
Yeah, I'll definitely be looking into the high-end scoring coming up here, and we've got lots of best ball season left. So it feels like it's been going for a while, but we've got lots of drafting time left to look into this stuff. Any other risers or fallers or value targets from tight end that you want to throw out before we finish up?
I have a few names here. It's been an interesting offseason at tight end, just with a lot of moves that have been made. But I mean, the one guy for me that I'm super excited about is David Njoku, who I've just, I've been waiting for him to kind of, but he had a good second season. It was a while ago now, 2018, but he went for 640 yards and 4 touchdowns in his second season. But he was a really good looking prospect coming out. Was a first round pick, elite athleticism, has just sort of been buried behind some other guys in Cleveland lately, but now got the franchise tag. So, he's making a good bit of money for this season, at least. Cleveland's obviously not committed long-term, but he's making a lot of money this season. Austin Hooper's gone, gets the big quarterback upgrade with Deshaun Watson. So I don't know, maybe we missed the buy window on Njoku, but he's someone I'm super excited about for this season and longer term, because he's still a young guy.
Yeah, after that second season, we were all like, all right, here goes the full Njoku breakout. And then Browns were like, all right, here comes Austin Hooper for a lot of money. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense, guys. So, yeah, he's finally out of the way. He's one that I have down as well. I have Njoku, I have Evan Engram, and I have O.J. Howard. And I think, you mentioned all the positives with Njoku. The biggest reason that I like all of these guys is that you don't have to pay a lot to acquire them right now. So, there's really only upside, I think, from where they start, and that's the key, because I look down the tight end rankings and I don't see a lot of guys with upside versus where they're currently standing. So I'm going to take a shot on guys like Njoku, who turns 26 in July, as you mentioned. Evan Engram turns 28 in September, so he's not old yet. His tight end production, you mentioned the tight end production falls off more slowly than wide receiver. So we have those aging curves that we go by, and everybody starts declining, but the decline is not quite so steep at tight end as it is at wide receiver. So we can reasonably expect more from Evan Engram than we might a receiver at a similar age. I don't think that guy has been able to combine health with real coaching since 2017, his rookie year. So I don't think we really know what Evan Engram can do, and we might never see anything. But now that he's way at the bottom of tight end 2 territory, there's really no downside to taking a shot, especially now that he's with a team that's at least willing to pay him $10 million for a year. O.J. Howard is the last guy, and his outlook is even, I guess, dimmer than Ingram's, because he could only get a small 1-year contract. He's had even more injury issues, lots more missed time recently, and his team let him walk this offseason, which is not a good sign. But still a talented player, was a first-round pick. He turns 28 in mid-November, so also not old. And I think landing in Buffalo, I'm not saying I'm betting on O.J. Howard to outperform Dawson Knox, but I think there's a non-zero chance that O.J. Howard is the top scoring tight end for the Bills this season without either of those guys getting hurt.
Yeah, I'm with you, and it's funny you mentioned that, because I actually have Dawson Knox here as a guy who is kind of, has fallen in my rankings, and is someone I'd probably looking to be selling right now, coming off what was a pretty productive 2021 season. But I mean, I'm still just not sure how committed the Bills are to him. And as you said, I mean, Howard only got a 1-year, $3.5 million deal, so it's not like the Bills signed him as like the clear Knox replacement. I still think Knox is probably the favorite to lead the team's tight ends and targets this season. But I mean, the selling point with Knox is just the offense he's in. But again, I'm not sure how long he's going to be in Buffalo. And he wasn't super efficient last season. He was 23rd in yards per route run among 35 qualifying tight ends, 21st among those 35 in PFF receiving grade. So it's not like he was that good. It's just, he got decent volume in one of the league's best passing games. And as you've mentioned, that there's a chance that goes away now if Howard just, proves to be better.
Yeah, similar season to Robert Tonyan a couple years ago in Green Bay. Any other tight ends you want to throw out?
No, that's it. We've been here long enough.
I agree. So that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. Head over to draftsharks.com now, if you haven't already done so, to check out the fancy new Dynasty tools that DS Insiders have already been raving about. Rankings with 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10-year expectations based on those aging curves that we've mentioned a few times. A draft war room that's ready to help you navigate your Dynasty drafts. Finally, what you've been waiting for. Plus, of course, our rookie content. Even if you haven't become a DS Insider yet and you're not able to access those rankings or the draft war room, you can read all of our Dynasty rookie scouting reports for free. This year's class, as well as those from years past. Jared, I believe that you posted David Bell today, didn't you?
I did, yeah. And there's one of these every year, but he is the case of awesome college production, but like very scary measurables. So it's kind of what do you weigh more heavily? And I'm curious to see what the NFL thinks of him and what round of the draft he goes in.
Yeah, so read all about him, and lots of other guys will have basically a player a day up until the NFL draft. So plenty more coming, but plenty already available to read. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us.